Hello, well, I'm here with Fabio De Castro. I love that name from Simplify Finance today, who is a mortgage broker. I'm really interested to have a conversation with him because it's certainly interesting times in the home markets at the moment. But before we do that, I think it's always good to get to know the person. So, Fabio, would you like to tell us a little bit about you and why
Sure.
you became a mortgage broker?
Okay. Yeah. Thank you for the opportunity. I was working in banking for a while. I was working for about 10 years. After doing that for a long time, I sort of saw a little bit of a gap on the market. I thought at the time, like brokers were being very transactional. So they were just, selling a lot of the major banks. They were just focused, the banks they're comfortable with. And I didn't think there was a like holistic way of looking after clients. So about 6 years ago, we decided to start the business. So we started Simplify Finance. It was just me, myself, and I have a business partner. But now there's nine of us. So we've been doing this. This is
Wow.
year six now, and just really passionate about just giving people choice.
Tell me who your typical customer is, because you're based in St Leonard's, right? So
Yeah.
not too far away from me today. But tell us about your typical customer.
We have a little bit of everything. We have from first home buyers, like someone trying to get into the market, to professional investors. So I suppose there's a big range of sort of clientele these days. You generally start helping because the business now is maturing. So we helped a lot of people buy their first home, and then there's a little bit of equity now. Not a little bit, because Sydney and Australia sort of grew. So there's equity, and for us is really just working together with our clients to try and, what can we do with that equity? What can you do in terms of creating wealth? We believe, property is a good vehicle to do that. So to answer your question, is a bit of everything. There's a lot of investors, but a lot of first home buyers. Like we do like to work with people trying to get into the market and sort of guide them through those steps as well.
And I'm sure, given where you're based, you predominantly have customers from Sydney and probably from around the area that you're in. And
Yeah,
you've just
yeah,
mentioned, Sydney over the last 12 months has certainly been experiencing a bit of a property boom.
a little bit. Yeah.
Um, just a little bit, although things seem to have slowed. But you're probably at the coalface. What do you see happening out there at the moment in home buyer land?
I'm finding like the market's sort of stabilizing. I obviously there's so many opinions. Like multiple banks are saying the market's going to contract between like retract between 6 and 12%. There's some people saying a little bit more. We haven't seen that. We've seen still the activity and the inquiries are still coming through. A lot of people are now more comfortable to approach real estate agents to buy property, because it's not as chaotic as it was in the past, that you go to an open house and there's 20 people on the line and contracts out. So the auctions are a little bit quieter now. It's just maybe one or two people bidding, which kind of gives a little bit more confidence for like for my clients to go and say, hey, the market is not as crazy as before, but they still believe on the long-term strategy of it. But I do see it flatten out in terms of pricing. Like I can't see the growth that we had over the last couple of years, but I could be wrong. Like Sydney keeps surprising us every year. So
Fabio, what would a typical customer come to you for, and what questions do they ask?
generally, they just come for guidance, understanding the process, because we find a lot of the challenges here is financial literacy, which is essentially understanding the mechanics of a mortgage. How does it work? The loan to value ratio, how much can you borrow against the property? That's, what they're trying to understand. How much of deposit they need. Do they pay stamp duty? They don't pay stamp duty. Is it, if it's certain situations, if it's their first home. So a lot of it is just guidance to understand the process, and then we'll take them through that journey of just taking through all what from start to finish, what that means, what can we do in terms of getting into the property market.
Yeah, because it's easy to talk about this, isn't it? Because you live and breathe it every day, and I do a little bit, and you assume
Yes.
everyone knows how to go about getting a mortgage or buying a home. But you mentioned during the conversation that property still does help people grow wealth, and I think that in Australia that is very, very true. Now, I know, you probably don't give advice around this, but what do you see the biggest barrier for people actually getting into that first home?
Um, Obviously, we live in a very tough market, and we got to be honest. Like Sydney is very expensive, and we have to come to terms with that. A lot of people, they're almost afraid of inquiring where their situation is. Like a lot of people that come to us, they are in a very good position and they can get in a market, but it's because this unknown and it's so scary. Understanding the process, they sometimes don't take that leap. So for me, is always encouraging someone at whatever part of the process. If you just started saving, or if you've been saving for a while, there's so many things that we can do. There's family guarantees. There's government incentives. There's you can borrow 95%. So I suppose from my point of view, it's just always good to reach out to someone, obviously, that you can trust, or a mortgage broker or a bank, and really run your numbers, right? So understand where your borrowing capacity is. So let's start with that. So this is what I can borrow with my partner or by myself. And then from there, what we generally do is we give them different price points. So let's say you want to buy something for 650. This is how much in savings you have. That's the bare minimum. And then 700, 800, because then you give them a clear goal and a clear strategy. And then people feel a little bit more comfortable because they're not just saving for the sake of it. A lot of people come to us and they're like, I've been saving for years, but I was never know how much is enough. Like, how much do I need to get there? And the minute you have that goal, you can work towards it. Again, it's really hard. We all done it. Like when I first bought my property, I put everything in it, and it was a sacrifice that I think it's worth it, because the first one is always the hardest one, and is always managing that forward and use that to create wealth.
So, Fabio, you have a lot of experience. If you could just give people one, and especially those first home buyers, what would be the one piece of advice you'd give them?
We always start with understanding their numbers, right? Understanding their finances, because a lot of times people are coming to us with the aspiration of buying a property, but they don't really know their figures, so they don't know how much they're spending. So it's really, we start from there. We start about understanding, how much money can you put aside? What are your expenses that are discretionary that we can sort of scale back to sort of make that sacrifice to start putting a little bit extra aside, so we can help them, through that journey in terms of, saving their deposit, and then obviously understanding other ways of doing. We can use, bank of mom and dad. We can use equity in their property. We can, borrow up to 95% of the value of the property, so the amount of deposit that you need is a little bit less. So there's all sorts of scenarios that we can take them through as well.
Thank you. And I think that word of advice there about understand your saving and spending patterns is perhaps one of the best pieces of advice you could give, right? Because I know many of us don't. And that is probably a very good note to end on. So thank you very much, Fabio, for the conversation today.
My absolute pleasure.